Good day, everyone. My name is Tigga Kingston. I'm a professor at Texas Tech University and I'm the co-chair for the IUCN BAT Specialist Group. And I'm really delighted to be able to bring to you today a Christmas story about how a crazy dream that started nearly 10 years ago spread and finally came true in 2020. Our story starts about 9 years ago with a presentation I gave at NASBA, which is the North American Bat Meeting, in which I pondered the potential for linking existing regional bat conservation networks into some kind of meta-network or global network of networks, and whether that might better support bat conservation. And that led to the work I want to share with you today, which is available as a chapter in the Bats of the Anthropocene book, so it's open access, in which my co-authors, who were all leaders or key members of some of the other main regional networks, and I really look to see to draw from our experience in our networks and from theories about the structure of effective governance networks, and to see how we could pull all that information together to address this pathway towards a global bat conservation network. Now, networks are important for two key reasons. They give access to expertise and knowledge beyond that can be held by any one individual. And when that expertise is shared and integrated, they allow for coordinated effort. So really, it's essentially like saying that we are more than the sum of our parts. Now, at the time we were writing, this had already been recognised and led to regional and network formation in many parts of the world. We had RELCOM in Latin America, Eurobats and BatLife Europe and Bat Conservation Trust in parts of Europe. We had CB in Southeast Asia, the ABS in Australasia, and just a few years previously, Bat Conservation Africa had launched. Network formation had been motivated by a combination of the limited capacity in many of these regions, and then this shared taxonomy, habitats and ecosystems found within regions, the shared threats that researchers were facing in the regions, and the fact that often you had to address issues that were moving across borders, so hunting, migration, or the need for taxonomic cooperation across borders, and so on. And most of these networks shared culture to some extent, or geopolitical identification. And activities tended to focus on conservation-oriented research or direct conservation efforts. There was typically a strong element of outreach and education, as well as training and student development and general capacity building. So we recognised the need for a meta-network that would critically retain the autonomy of these individual regional networks, but could provide a mechanism for this sharing of expertise and capacity building at this much larger scale. There are threats that are shared across networks. So, for example, hunting of bats across the Paleotropics affects many networks. And then we're seeing emerging threats most recently in 2020, threats that are emerging that are of a global scale. We're also seeing threats that are moving or spreading. Wind turbine installations, for example, we have an enormous depth of knowledge from 20 years of work in North America and Europe, but wind installations now spreading throughout the tropics. So we need a network that can share expertise across the globe. Finally, this network needs to be able to provide a unified voice to speak for bats, particularly when there are emergent and global threats. And little did we know when we wrote this book chapter that this would become of paramount importance just 4 years later. The chapter spent a fair bit of effort talking about what we can learn from network theory about how to structure our groups. Structuring them so that they'll be resilient to change and have a good foundation for growth and for interaction. And so very briefly, here's a little teeny primer on networks. All networks is a map of the relationship between units, which are referred to as nodes. So a unit could be a person, could be a species, could be a gene, but in our case, we're talking about conservation networks. These units are initially, these nodes are people, and these relationships among them, this could be a collaboration, it could be a social relationship, it could be some kind of communication. And so individuals, nodes are connected into a network through these interactions. And the most useful part of this is that networks have statistical properties. There are properties of the individual nodes, of the links, but there's also properties of the network as a whole that relate to its structure and function and its resilience. The best network structure depends on context and also on time, and it can change through time. So for example, an organic network organic networks often form through connection of a handful of highly connected individuals. So if we look at figure B here, we've got these two nodes, these two individuals who are connected to many other individuals and to each other, but these other individuals have few connections among them. So you could think about this as two people, maybe mid-career, lots of connections, they know each other, they like each other, they trust each other, they want to work together, they realize the potential for pulling a network together, and they bring all their connections with them. This is a really strong way to start a network because this cohesiveness between the two principal nodes helps give the network some strength, and their connectivity, their degree, their connections around the discipline or the region help pull more people in. Now there are problems though with this network for the long term, because if you don't start improving the connections among all the other members, you're very susceptible to loss of these key players. What happens if this individual retires or leaves the network for some reason, or this individual? Okay, there's a good possibility that the network will collapse. So you really want to then try and transition from this founding structure to something where everybody is much more highly connected. Then if you lose an individual node, an individual person, the rest of the network should be much more able to carry on because it's much more highly connected. Now the drawback with a highly connected network is you start to have what we call a homogeneity of the network structure and the content of the network. So everybody essentially thinks the same way, says the same body of knowledge. And while this can allow for really fast responses to issues, it doesn't allow for very nuanced and sophisticated responses to complex issues where you might need different perspectives, different knowledge domains, and so on. So ideally, you achieve that complexity by having some structure within your network. So this first image A, there wasn't much structure, everybody's connected. But if we look down to the bottom here, we see two modules. Now each of these modules are well connected, but they could hold different sets of knowledge. Perhaps one is an expert holds all the disease ecology networks, and perhaps another is a regional network. This is no good if they're not connected. So what we really want to be transitioning to is a modular structure where the modules are connected, and we call these nodes or people that connect modules bridging actors because they bridge between the two networks. So imagine, if you will, a global network of networks where we retain all the networks' knowledge, all their connectivity, their connections within themselves. But now through bridging actors, through interactions, we start connecting everybody so that we can share this expert knowledge in each of these sub-modules. The dream goal is to get over to this final picture here, where not only do we have connected sub-modules, but we now reach out to groups beyond our own network that have different missions or different emphases, but do share some element of, do share ambitions or share knowledge that we hold as well, so that is useful to us. So for example, this might be if the network on the left here was about 1K and this is genomics, one of these peripheral actors. Peripheral networks might be a genomics group that looks at a completely different set of organisms. If this were CB Crew or the Southeast Asian network, perhaps one of these peripheral actors is a limestone karst entity, because our region is full of karst. So you now start overlapping to peripheral groups that have some connection with you. So our goal really is to try and build instead of just having these two modules, we would have all of the networks represented in this kind of submodular structure that collaborates and is connected through collaboration and cooperation, and reaches out to groups beyond our own. So how do we go from this path, from this quite theoretical perspective on what makes a good network, to an actual global network of networks? Well, first off, we want to start by strengthening any of the existing networks, but we also need to then address where we have gaps, regional gaps. At the time, the colours print, regions in colour were those that were supported networks at the time we published, but since then, I'm really happy to say, new regional networks have become established. So WABINET is the West Asian Bat Research Network, which focuses very broadly in here and has a disease and conservation mandate. There's a network that has just begun under Dai Fukui's leadership in East Asia. And then just a few weeks ago, PACBAT is the newest network that is just getting itself launched, and this remit extends to Oceania with a particular emphasis on the Pacific Islands. One of the exciting things that's happened since the book chapter is the emergence of domain-based or thematic-based networks. So we have BAT1K that connects researchers from all over the world, focusing on bat genomes and what that, both sequencing them and then what that can tell us. We have BORN, which focuses on disease ecology and disease biology. WABINET, as I mentioned. We have BPEN, which looks at the phenomics of bats, and the Global Bat Taxonomy Working Group. So now we have this exciting opportunity to integrate this domain knowledge with our regional global coverage. So it hasn't been a very straightforward path, but the network leaders met in 2016 at the Durban meeting, and everybody was wildly excited. Shortest meeting of my life. We're in a busy pub. We all think this is a brilliant idea. And so we decided to move forward with it. Of course, it's hard to run networks without funding. So we've been trying over the years to secure funding. We met again in Phuket at the IBRC to renew our vows. And we had continued with our mission or our efforts to secure funding. But of course, in 2020, COVID-19 hit. And at that point, we decided we really needed to go ahead and at least provide one voice for bats, and provide curated content and start connecting the networks and provide a mechanism for bringing ourselves together and reaching out to the general public. Happily though, this is where the dream come true bit comes. The NSF submission, so NSF is the National Science Foundation, the US's primary federal science funding, that we had been submitted the previous year, got funded in 2020, and that gives us an opportunity to start a 5-year project under the auspices of GBATnet, which will look at how bats can function as models for vertebrates for understanding diversification, why are there so many bats, and sustainability. How are we going to save them? So the mission of GBATnet is to secure sustainable bat diversity in a changing world, and we have a long way to go, but I could fill a slide of acknowledgements in very, very teeny-weeny font if I tried to get absolutely everybody involved acknowledged on these slides. So please forgive me in that I am just taking this opportunity to gratefully acknowledge all of the networks that have been involved, thinking about this, being excited about it, following the dream, supporting the dream, and of course for all the brilliant work that they're doing as networks. Extra special thanks, of course, go to Susan, Liliana and Nancy, who has been working with me. They're the other PIs on the NSF Award that will be taking our book chapter and our enthusiasm from a dream to a reality. Thank you very much, everybody. Oh, and happy Christmas or season's greetings.